The hushed sanctity of the public library, typically a sanctuary of whispered reverence, and the gentle rustle of turning pages, was where Dr. Eris Thorne found her semblance of peace. It was a space far removed from the sterile intensity of government offices or the clamor of courtrooms, a deliberate choice for a woman who carried a secret past, as heavy as it was impactful. In her late 30s, Eris possessed a quiet grace, her features soft, almost unassuming, yet her deep-set eyes held a startling intensity that hinted at a formidable intellect. She was dressed in a simple, unadorned navy blue blouse and sensible slacks, her dark hair pulled back in a neat, unassuming bun. No one would guess that this seemingly ordinary black woman, lost in the quiet contemplation of dusty tomes, was a prodigious scholar of civil rights and criminal justice reform, her insights sought by non-profit organizations nationwide. And fewer still would ever suspect her previous life as a former senior analyst for the FBI's Public Corruption Division, a past she meticulously guarded. Eris sat tucked away in a dimly lit corner, a worn paperback on the history of the civil rights movement open in her lap. Her gaze, however, wasn't solely on the printed words. Beneath the unassuming facade of her personal laptop, the screen glowed with complex algorithms, silently churning through terabytes of publicly available data. She was meticulously analyzing local arrest records, conviction rates, and demographic statistics, searching for subtle patterns of bias, the invisible threads of systemic injustice that often went unnoticed by the untrained eye. The rhythmic tapping of a distant keyboard, the soft turning of pages, the occasional cough from another patron. These were the only sounds that punctuated her intense concentration, a stark contrast to the urgent chatter and coded directives that once dominated her professional life. Her internal world was a constant push and pull. There was the profound yearning for a quiet, civilian existence, far from the shadows and dangers that had once defined her. Yet an even deeper desire burned within her, an unshakable conviction to fight for justice, to expose the insidious rot of corruption and prejudice whenever she encountered it. This internal conflict, between the siren call of anonymity and the moral imperative to act, was a constant companion, a quiet hum beneath the surface of her calm exterior. Beyond her academic pursuits and her hidden past, Eris possessed a profound, almost secret, wellspring of empathy. She dedicated a significant portion of her time to providing pro bono legal counsel to underprivileged families caught in the labyrinthine coils of the justice system. Her focus was particularly on young individuals unjustly accused, their futures hanging precariously in the balance. She never sought recognition, nor did she accept a single penny for her invaluable assistance. It was an act of pure altruism, a quiet rebellion against the inequities she so keenly observed. Just last month, a faded, crudely drawn crayon picture had arrived in her mailbox, addressed simply to the library lady. It depicted a stick-figure family, smiling broadly under a bright yellow sun. A small, childish hand had scrawled below it, "Thank you for saving my daddy." It was from the daughter of a young man she had helped exonerate from a wrongful theft charge, a case where she had quietly unearthed the critical, overlooked piece of exculpatory evidence. Eris had traced the crayon lines with a delicate finger, a rare, soft smile gracing her lips. It was these small, personal victories, these quiet acts of defiance against injustice, that truly nourished her soul, reminding her why she couldn't simply disappear into the quiet life she craved. As the afternoon sun streamed through the library's large, arched windows, casting dancing dust motes in its golden light, Eris gently closed her laptop. The dark screen reflected her own composed, determined face, framed by the subtle glow of the quiet room. She reached up almost unconsciously to touch a faint, thin scar on her left wrist, just beneath the cuff of her sleeve. It was a relic from a particularly harrowing undercover operation during her FBI days, a constant, subtle reminder of the dangers she had faced and the precise, razor-sharp instincts she still possessed. A fleeting, intense look, a glint of cold steel, passed through her eyes as she idly skimmed a newspaper headline about a local corruption scandal. It was a familiar flicker of the sharp, analytical mind that had once dismantled complex criminal networks, a subtle reminder of the formidable power she still held in reserve. Just then, her private, secure phone, a discreet, nondescript device she kept carefully tucked away, vibrated silently in her pocket. The caller ID was masked, displaying only a series of scrambled numbers, a protocol reserved for the most sensitive, highest-level communications. It was an urgent, encrypted ping from a former highly trusted FBI contact, a silent alert of a developing situation that mirrored the very issues she had just been analyzing. Eris, ever mindful of her surroundings, quickly silenced the phone, her thumb pressing the reject button before anyone nearby could notice the unusual device or the urgent encrypted communication. She always prioritized maintaining her low profile, even at the cost of slight inconvenience. This extreme discretion, this deliberate cultivation of anonymity, had become second nature to her. Few knew the true extent of her personal network, let alone the precise mechanisms she employed to remain invisible in plain sight. She understood that sometimes the most powerful individuals were those who could move through the world unseen, observing without being observed. Tomorrow, this very principle of calculated anonymity would be tested, not in the high stakes of national security, but in the mundane, yet deeply personal, arena of a local courtroom. The air in courtroom foyer of the district municipal courthouse hung heavy and stale, a familiar cocktail of old paper, disinfectant, and the unspoken anxieties of those who passed through its doors. Unlike the hushed reverence of the library, this space hummed with a low, restless energy. The shuffle of papers, the creak of wooden benches, the rustle of nervous sighs. Dr. Eris Thorne sat in the witness stand, a deceptively ordinary figure amidst the courtroom's formal trappings. She wore the same unassuming navy blouse, her hair still neatly tied, her demeanor a picture of calm. Yet, beneath the surface, her senses were heightened, processing every subtle shift in the room. The nervous tics of the young defense attorney, the prosecuting lawyer's overly confident posture, the judge's weary impatience. She wasn't just observing. She was analyzing, dissecting the unseen currents of power and bias that often dictated the flow of justice in such a setting. Eris was there as an expert witness for the defense, a role that quietly resonated with her deeper purpose. The defendant, Darius D. Jones, was a bright, soft-spoken young black man, barely out of his teens, accused of assault. Darius was the son of a dear friend of Eris's, a woman she deeply respected. Eris knew Darius to be kind and diligent, a promising student whose dreams were now teetering on the edge of ruin. Her research, coupled with her acute instincts, told her that this case was riddled with procedural errors and, more chillingly, an undercurrent of racial bias that targeted Darius simply for fitting a certain profile. Her testimony aimed to expose these flaws, specifically focusing on the questionable methods used to gather evidence against him. The prosecution's key witness and the architect of Darius's predicament was Detective Gordon Briggs. A man in his early 50s, Briggs exuded an aura of hardened cynicism. His uniform was immaculate, his movements deliberate, betraying a long career built on bending rules just enough to secure convictions. He had a reputation for aggressive tactics and an almost pathological disregard for procedural niceties when he believed he had his man. Briggs possessed an unyielding confidence in his own judgment, bordering on arrogance, and he viewed defense attorneys, and especially their expert witnesses, with open contempt. He saw Eris not as a specialist, but as an academic nuisance, a theorist who couldn't possibly comprehend the gritty realities of police work. His testimony, delivered with an air of absolute certainty, painted Darius as inherently dangerous, fitting neatly into his preconceived notions. The prosecutor, Chief Prosecutor Vivian Holloway, a woman in her 40s with sharp, ambitious eyes, sat at her table, observing Eris with a dismissive air. Holloway was known for her high conviction rate and her pragmatic approach to justice, often prioritizing winning cases over the painstaking pursuit of absolute truth. She implicitly trusted the police narrative and viewed Eris as an obstacle, a pedantic academic trying to complicate a straightforward case. Her carefully manicured appearance and poised demeanor belied a steely resolve to secure another notch on her prosecutorial belt. She regarded Eris with a thinly veiled condescension, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What could this quiet scholar possibly know about real police work? During the initial phase of Eris's testimony, as she calmly began to outline a critical flaw in the chain of custody for digital evidence, Detective Briggs shifted in his seat, his irritation palpable. He exchanged a knowing glance with Holloway, a subtle signal of their shared disdain. When Eris spoke about the specific protocols for evidence tagging, details most civilians wouldn't know, Briggs visibly scoffed, a low, dismissive sound. "Dr. Thorne, if you even are a doctor in anything relevant," Briggs interjected from the prosecution table, his voice oozing sarcasm, "you're talking about textbook stuff, theory. Do you have any real-world experience? Have you ever had to chase down a perp at 3 a.m., process a crime scene under pressure? Because from where I sit, you're just a pretty face with a stack of academic papers that don't mean squat in the real world." He leaned back, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on his lips, daring her to refute him. A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. The young defense attorney, though outwardly composed, fidgeted with her pen. Even Judge Davies, a stern but fair judge, frowned, tapping his gavel lightly. He was a stickler for courtroom decorum and found Briggs's outburst unprofessional. Eris, however, remained outwardly calm. Her voice, when she responded, was measured, devoid of emotion, yet carried an undeniable steel. "Detective Briggs," she stated, her gaze unwavering, "my analysis is based on established legal precedents and forensic standards, which, if not meticulously followed, compromise the integrity of any evidence. My expertise is not theoretical. It is rooted in extensive practical application within the framework of criminal investigations." Briggs, unaccustomed to such a direct, unflappable response, pressed harder, his face reddening. "Practical application, huh? So, you're telling me, a civilian, you know more about police work than I do? Someone who's actually out there doing the dirty work, putting their life on the line?" He laughed, a short, derisive sound that echoed unpleasantly in the quiet courtroom. "Please, ma'am. You think you understand how we operate? You think you know anything about the real criminals out there, the type who commit these assaults? We know who they are, and frankly, they fit the profile, always." His words, laced with casual cruelty, were directed not just at Eris, but at Darius, a blatant, prejudiced insinuation of his inherent criminality. Eris felt a cold, righteous anger begin to simmer beneath her calm exterior. The casual racism, the dismissal of her expertise, the outright slander against Darius. It was a familiar pattern, one she had seen countless times in her past life. It was a pattern of abuse, of power leveraged against the powerless, of justice deliberately subverted. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about exposing the systemic rot that allowed men like Briggs to operate with impunity, destroying lives in the process. "Detective Briggs." Eris's voice cut through the courtroom, no longer soft but razor-sharp. "Your personal opinions on the defendant's character are irrelevant and prejudicial. My testimony pertains to the integrity of the evidence. Specifically, I refer to the proper adherence to Federal Bureau of Investigation Protocol 10B, subsection 3, regarding the real-time, time-stamped digital tagging of cellular data extracted from a crime scene. Your report, Detective, conspicuously lacks this crucial detail, a detail that is paramount for establishing an unbroken chain of custody and verifying the authenticity of the alleged evidence against Mr. Jones." The courtroom collectively held its breath. Protocol 10B? Digital tagging? These were terms that implied a level of technical and legal specificity far beyond what a typical academic consultant would possess. Briggs's smug expression faltered, a flicker of genuine shock crossing his face. He knew that protocol. He had deliberately bypassed it, counting on the obscurity of such technical details to go unnoticed in a local court. Vivian Holloway, at the prosecution table, frowned. She glanced at Briggs, then back at Eris, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The question was too specific, too knowledgeable for a mere academic. Briggs, momentarily flustered, quickly regained his bluster. "What in the world are you talking about, lady? You're just making up procedures now to confuse the court. I move to strike this witness's entire testimony, Your Honor. She's clearly fabricating details and wasting this court's valuable time." He slammed his hand on the table, trying to exert dominance, his voice booming. "She has no idea how real investigations are conducted. She's just a theorist, playing games with people's lives." His words were a challenge, a desperate attempt to reassert control, to dismiss her as unqualified. But for Eris, it was more than that. It was a direct, undeniable assault on the very foundation of justice, a blatant disregard for due process, and a personal insult to her deeply held convictions. This was her point of no return. The quiet scholar, the woman who craved anonymity, now knew she could not stand by and let this injustice prevail. Her past, her training, her very being demanded that she act. She would not back down. The oppressive silence that followed Detective Gordon Briggs's derisive laughter and his brazen attempt to dismiss Eris from the stand was absolute. It hung heavy in the air of Courtroom 4A, stifling the usual courtroom murmurs, leaving only the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Briggs, his face flushed with self-satisfaction, exchanged a smug glance with Chief Prosecutor Vivian Holloway, who, despite a flicker of unease, maintained her composed facade. He truly believed he had silenced Eris, effectively discrediting her and securing another effortless conviction for his department. This was his arena, his stage, and he was accustomed to holding absolute sway. Dr. Eris Thorne, however, remained utterly unperturbed. Her initial calm, which Briggs had so contemptuously misinterpreted as weakness, now deepened into an unnerving stillness. Her dark eyes, no longer veiled by the persona of a quiet academic, held a piercing clarity that seemed to strip away Briggs's arrogance, revealing the petty tyrant beneath. She wasn't merely seeing a prejudiced police officer. She was seeing a systemic rot, a glaring hole in the fabric of justice that allowed such individuals to operate with impunity. Briggs's actions weren't just an inconvenience, they were a direct affront to the dignity of Darius Jones, a blatant disregard for due process, and a personal insult to Eris's deeply held convictions. She had faced down far more dangerous adversaries in her past life, individuals who operated in the shadows, their crimes far more insidious than Briggs's overt bigotry. He was merely another obstacle, a stubborn knot that needed to be untangled with surgical precision. Detective Briggs, Eris's voice, when it finally cut through the tension, was not loud, but it resonated with a chilling, authoritative precision that silenced even the judge's restless fidgeting. It was devoid of anger or any discernible emotion, which made it all the more unsettling. Each word was carefully enunciated, imbued with an undeniable, yet understated authority that compelled every eye in the courtroom to snap towards her. Your continued attempts to disparage my professional credentials and to obstruct my testimony do not negate the facts, nor do they absolve you of your sworn duty to uphold the law and proper procedure. Her gaze, sharp and unwavering, locked onto Briggs's, forcing the detective to meet her eyes, truly meet them, for the first time without the lens of his ingrained prejudice. Briggs, momentarily caught off guard by her unflappable composure, stammered, attempting to regain his footing. "Look, lady, I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what I'm talking about. You're just a bookworm trying to tell me how to do my job. This is ridiculous." He gestured dismissively at her, then appealed to Judge Davies. "Your Honor, I must insist. This witness is clearly out of line, irrelevant, and attempting to confuse the court. I move to have her testimony stricken and removed from the stand." His voice was laced with a desperate edge, a subtle sign of his crumbling control. But Eris cut him off with a single decisive gesture of her hand, a subtle, almost imperceptible flick of her wrist that nonetheless carried immense silencing weight. Her gaze, cold and unyielding, pinned him. "Detective Sergeant Briggs," she stated, her voice lowering, intensifying. "You claim to be an expert in police procedure. You claim to know the realities of collecting evidence. Yet when presented with a specific federal protocol, FBI Protocol 10B, subsection 3, regarding the real-time, time-stamped digital tagging of cellular data extracted from a crime scene, you dismiss it as theoretical or confusing. This protocol is not merely a suggestion, detective. It is a mandatory safeguard designed to prevent evidence tampering and ensure due process. Its absence in your report regarding Mr. Jones's alleged phone data is not an oversight. It is a critical, deliberate procedural bypass." Briggs's face, which had been pale with a mix of confusion and indignation, now flushed scarlet, then drained again to an ashen gray. His jaw went slack, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning, profound terror. He knew that protocol. He had always dismissed it, believing local courts would never scrutinize such technical minutiae. The cold steel in Eris's gaze was unsettling. It was the look of someone who saw through him, not just to his petty cruelty, but to the deeper systemic rot beneath. The casual power he wielded over ordinary citizens had just evaporated, replaced by a terrifying sense of his own vulnerability. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands visibly trembling, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. Then, with a deliberate, almost ritualistic movement, Eris reached into her simple, unassuming black handbag. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, wondering what mundane object she might produce, perhaps a printed copy of the federal protocol or a legal brief. Her hand emerged clutching a slim, dark leather wallet. It was an unassuming object, one she carried with her constantly, a quiet repository of her true identity, a testament to her unyielding control. She unfastened the magnetic clasp of the wallet with a soft, almost imperceptible click. Her fingers, nimble and practiced from countless rapid identifications of classified documents, slid out a gleaming object. It wasn't a mundane driver's license. It wasn't a standard academic ID card. Under the harsh overhead fluorescent lights of the courtroom, a gold-plated FBI badge gleamed, its polished surface catching the light and casting a blinding glint across the room. Adjacent to it, nestled securely in a clear plastic sleeve within the wallet, was another, equally imposing credential. Emblazoned clearly on its face, beneath the elegant, stylized eagle seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, were the words, United States, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent, RET, Eris Thorne, former Intel and Public Corruption Division. Below that, a discreet yet clearly visible holographic security strip shimmered, a silent invitation to immediate, verifiable authentication by any federal agency. It was a credential that marked her as a former, but still highly respected and influential federal agent, with a specific expertise in rooting out public corruption. Eris did not speak. She simply held the wallet aloft, her arm steady, her expression unreadable. She held it just for a few seconds, long enough for the light to catch it, long enough for its stark, undeniable authority to sink into the collective consciousness of the courtroom. Detective Sergeant Briggs, Chief Prosecutor Vivian Holloway, Judge Davies, the young defense attorney, and the stunned reporters scrambling in the back rows. A collective gasp swept through the small group, quickly followed by a profound, almost terrifying silence. The court reporter stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the keys. Judge Davis's gavel clattered to the bench, his eyes wide with disbelief. Briggs's snickers died abruptly, choked off by dawning horror. His face, which moments before had held casual disdain or bored indifference, was now etched with incredulity and dawning dread. This wasn't just another civilian, another academic. This was something else entirely. This was a former FBI special agent, one with direct experience in public corruption. The full weight of her statement about FBI Protocol 10B, previously dismissed, now crashed down on him with devastating force. Detective Gordon Briggs, who had been trying to regain some semblance of composure, saw the badge. His face, which had been set in an arrogant sneer, instantly froze. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him a sickly, pallid white. His jaw went slack, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning, profound comprehension. The blood rushed from his face, leaving it pasty and ghost-like. His carefully constructed facade of superiority, built on years of petty power plays and ingrained prejudice, shattered in an instant, revealing the hollow, terrified man beneath. The implications were a cold, hard slap to his overinflated ego, a sudden, brutal shattering of his sense of untouchable privilege. His eyes darted wildly, frantically, from the gleaming badge to Eris's unflinching gaze, then to the stunned faces of the jury and the motionless judge, a silent, desperate plea for rescue that no one would answer. Chief Prosecutor Vivian Holloway, who had merely viewed Eris as an annoying obstacle, now felt a cold dread creep up her spine. Her ambition had always been her driving force, and now it was threatening to unravel. She knew the power of the FBI, especially one focused on public corruption. Her carefully constructed career, built on a foundation of trust in law enforcement, was suddenly on shaky ground. Her face, usually so composed, now showed a flicker of genuine alarm. Judge Davies, who had been observing the commotion from his bench, snapped to rigid attention, his body language shifting instantly from weary annoyance to profound deference. He knew who FBI special agents were, and he knew the gravity of their presence, especially when they revealed themselves in such a manner. He knew he had just narrowly avoided a catastrophic misjudgment, almost allowing an act of blatant prejudice to unfold unchecked in his own courtroom, directly in front of a former federal agent with a specialization in public corruption. He subtly, almost imperceptibly, nodded to the court bailiff, a silent acknowledgement of the seismic shift in power. In the press of shocked onlookers, Agent Thorne, Eris's former FBI colleague, and now her personal, albeit discreet, security detail, who had been observing from the back, discreetly pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the record button. He had witnessed this countless times, the slow, agonizing realization on people's faces as they grasped the true identity of the quiet woman they had just underestimated. This time, however, he had a direct order from Eris herself. Document everything. He began to record, ensuring every word, every contorted expression, every flicker of fear was captured. The bailiff, sensing the gravity of the moment, quickly ensured no other recording devices were present. But Agent Thorne's was encrypted and unnoticed. Eris, having allowed the badge's profound significance to fully register with Briggs, Holloway, and the stunned courtroom, slowly, deliberately, returned it to her wallet, tucking it away with the same practiced ease with which she had produced it. The brief flash of gold was gone, but its indelible impact lingered, a cold, hard truth that had irrevocably reset the entire dynamic of the courtroom. The air, once thick with Briggs's contempt, was now heavy with his terror, and a building wave of quiet, almost reverent respect from the observing Judge Davies and the stunned, grateful face of the young defense attorney. "Detective Sergeant Briggs," Eris stated, her voice returning to its calm, judicial cadence, but now imbued with an undeniable, steely edge that had been absent before. "Your outburst, your derogatory remarks, your blatant discriminatory actions, your gross professional misconduct, and your deliberate bypass of FBI Protocol 10B, subsection 3, constitute not only a severe breach of procedure, but also a clear violation of federal civil rights statutes and, potentially, an obstruction of justice. You are now formally relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending a full federal investigation led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Public Corruption Division. And let me be perfectly clear, your employment with this police department, and indeed your future in any form of law enforcement, is, as of this moment, over." She paused, allowing her words to sink in, their weight crushing Briggs's last vestiges of defiance. Her gaze then shifted to Chief Prosecutor Vivian Holloway, whose face was a mixture of shock and dawning dread. "Chief Prosecutor Holloway," Eris continued, her voice unwavering, "the evidence presented by Detective Briggs, now demonstrably compromised and obtained through illicit means, renders this prosecution null and void. I demand that the case against Mr. Darius Jones be dismissed with prejudice, effective immediately, and all charges against him be expunged from his record. Furthermore, given the clear patterns of procedural irregularities and potential civil rights violations that have come to light, I will be personally overseeing an immediate, comprehensive federal review of all cases handled by Detective Briggs and a broader investigation into the conduct of this police department under the direct authority of the FBI." Holloway merely nodded, speechless, her ambitious facade utterly shattered. Eris then turned to the young defense attorney, her expression softening infinitesimally, a subtle nod of acknowledgement. "Counselor," she said, her voice gentler, "your client, Mr. Darius Jones, is innocent. The charges against him will be dropped. You fought valiantly against overwhelming odds, and I commend your dedication to justice. You will be hearing from my former agency regarding future opportunities." The young attorney's eyes widened, a flicker of bewildered relief and awe washing over her face. Eris finally turned back to Detective Sergeant Briggs, who was trembling visibly, his face contorted in a silent plea. "Detective Sergeant Briggs," Eris concluded, her voice low and utterly devoid of mercy, "you have just ensured that not only your employment, but your entire career in law enforcement is over. Your contempt has served only to expose yourself and the rotten culture you represent. Now step down from that stand and await the federal agents who will be taking you into custody." The initial confrontation was over, and the tables had not just turned. They had been flipped with a devastating, undeniable force, setting in motion a cascade of consequences that Detective Sergeant Briggs, in his small-minded prejudice, could never have anticipated. Agent Thorne stepped forward, his phone still recording, a silent, implacable witness to the swift dispensing of justice. The courtroom, once frozen in disbelief, began to stir, a collective ripple of understanding spreading as the full weight of the FBI's involvement began to dawn on them. The immediate aftermath within Courtroom 4A was a maelstrom of stunned silence rapidly morphing into barely contained chaos. Detective Sergeant Briggs, a figure of pathetic indignity, was quickly and firmly escorted from the courtroom by two grim-faced federal agents who had materialized from the back rows. His bluster had dissolved into incoherent whimpers and panicked, desperate pleas. The initial whispers of shock quickly escalated into a frantic murmur as news reporters, sensing a story far larger than a petty assault case, began to scramble, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrust forward. The air in the courtroom, thick with the residue of confrontation, slowly began to clear, replaced by a growing hum of anxious anticipation. Eris, however, felt no immediate triumph. The adrenaline that had surged through her veins during the unveiling was receding, leaving behind the cold, strategic clarity of a seasoned executive. This initial skirmish, though satisfyingly decisive, was merely the prelude. She knew, with absolute certainty, that Briggs was a symptom, not the disease. The true battle lay ahead, against a deeply entrenched system that had allowed such blatant prejudice and lax operational oversight to fester within its ranks. She had to ensure that this incident, however dramatic, served as a catalyst for genuine systemic change, not just a one-off dismissal. Her immediate priority was to re-establish control over the narrative and ensure that the district attorney's office, and indeed the entire local police department, understood the absolute gravity of their collective failure. She retrieved her discreet, secure phone from her pocket and issued swift, precise instructions to Agent Thorne, her former FBI colleague, and now her discreet personal security detail, who stood by her, a silent, imposing presence. Ensure Mr. Jones is immediately released, and all charges against him are expunged from the record, fully and without prejudice. Secure all evidence related to this case, physical and digital. Notify the Attorney General's office. I want the Chief of Police, the District Attorney, and Assistant Special Agent in Charge Vance in a secure conference room at the local FBI field office in 30 minutes. This cannot wait. Just as Agent Thorne nodded, already on his secure line, the imposing figure of Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASAC, John Vance, the head of the local FBI field office, strode into the courtroom. He was a man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with a stern, unyielding face that usually commanded instant respect. Today, however, his face was a tight mask of professional concern, tinged with barely concealed fury. He had clearly been alerted to the unfolding disaster. Behind him trailed Chief of Police Thomas Sterling, a man in his 60s with a reputation for being old school and resistant to change, his usual calm replaced by visible agitation. District Attorney Evelyn Hayes, it was her office, not Holloway's directly, that oversaw the entire district. A sharp, meticulously dressed woman in her early 40s, her usual composure replaced by a visible tremor of anxiety, also entered, looking utterly overwhelmed. ASAC. Vance, upon seeing Eris, stopped short, his eyes narrowing. He had known Eris during her time at the FBI. She had been his subordinate for a brief period before her transfer to a highly specialized and confidential division. He had admired her intellect but found her methods unorthodox and too idealistic for the pragmatic realities of federal law enforcement. He approached her, his voice a low, terse rumble, devoid of his usual polished cordiality. "Dr. Thorne," he began, his tone taut with barely controlled exasperation. "My staff is reporting an extraordinary incident, something about Detective Sergeant Briggs, a public dismissal, and your presence. Can you enlighten me? This sounds highly irregular and potentially very damaging for agency relations." His tone was accusatory, implying Eris herself was the source of the irregularity and the public embarrassment. Eris's voice, however, remained calm, steady, and utterly unruffled. She chose her words with surgical precision, each one a calculated shot aimed at the systemic failures she had observed. ASAC Vance, Chief Sterling, District Attorney Hayes, your Detective Sergeant Briggs not only exhibited gross professional misconduct, but engaged in blatant, undeniable discriminatory behavior towards an innocent citizen in your courtroom. He verbally abused and publicly defamed Mr. Darius Jones, attempted to convict him on fabricated evidence, and openly defied judicial authority and my direct warnings, all based on transparent prejudice. My response was a necessary and immediate measure to de-escalate a volatile situation, re-establish control over due process, and confirm the gravity of his offenses when he repeatedly ignored my verbal warnings to cease and desist. Furthermore, his deliberate bypass of a critical federal protocol points to a far deeper issue within your department. Necessary? Or a highly irregular, perhaps even reckless display of authority that has now plunged my police department and the district attorney's office into a public relations nightmare? Chief Sterling retorted, his agitation escalating, his carefully constructed facade of calm beginning to crack. Dr. Thorne, we operate by established protocols, by the meticulous rules of contractual agreement and professional discretion. This public dismissal, the scene it creates. Do you understand the implications? Rumors are already swirling among other law enforcement agencies and with the local press that your actions were disproportionate, that you are unpredictable, that you acted out of personal pique, not professional necessity. We're already getting calls about potential lawsuits from Briggs and the other officers, citing emotional distress and wrongful termination. His voice rose, tinged with a desperate edge. He was clearly feeling the pressure, trying to deflect blame and protect his department's image. District Attorney Hayes, looking pale, chimed in. Yes, Dr. Thorne, Chief Sterling is correct. While we understand your concerns, this incident has created an unprecedented legal and public relations crisis. My office is already reviewing the potential for a formal inquiry into your conduct, citing judicial bias and improper procedure. Federal agencies simply don't operate this way in local courts. There is a chain of command, a process. You circumvented all of it. Her words were sharp, tinged with a thinly veiled threat. Eris's grip tightened imperceptibly on her phone. The insidious whispers she had always quietly endured, the subtle dismissals of her competence due to her identity, the casual assumptions about her right to be in certain spaces, were now amplified, weaponized against her by a system desperate to maintain its biased status quo. She understood the precarious tightrope she walked. A black woman, a former federal agent, had just executed a maneuver that, in entrenched circles, would be seen as an outrageous breach of decorum, an unforgivable overstep. Her integrity, her hard-earned reputation, even her future collaborations within the broader law enforcement community, now hung by a single fraying thread. The institutional inertia, the desire to maintain the status quo and avoid controversy, was a far more formidable opponent than Briggs's petty tyranny. Chief Sterling, District Attorney Hayes, ASAC Vance, Eris interjected, her voice firm, cutting through their agitated monologue. My actions were in direct response to a criminal act, an act of discriminatory profiling and gross negligence regarding a citizen's fundamental rights. Furthermore, given the nature of the original complaints I've discreetly gathered about your department, Detective Sergeant Briggs's behavior leads me to believe this is not an isolated incident, but indicative of a deeper, more dangerous systemic problem within your police department's culture. My concern is not personal. It is for the safety, privacy, and equitable treatment of all citizens, and for the integrity of the justice system you purport to uphold. Vance sighed, a frustrated, exasperated sound that resonated with the immense pressure he was under. Fine, Dr. Thorne, fine, but this has put us in an impossible position. Our legal team is already screaming for a full internal inquiry into your conduct, citing judicial bias and improper procedure. The optics are abysmal. We need to handle this with the utmost delicacy to avoid a public relations catastrophe and a potentially damaging lawsuit against us. I am already en route to the precinct with Chief Sterling and District Attorney Hayes. You will be there. You need to explain yourself, and you need to convince us that this isn't a pattern of uncontrolled behavior. Your continued contract with federal agencies, and indeed your future ability to collaborate on joint task forces, could hinge on this." The call ended abruptly, the dial tone a flat, final note in the sudden silence of the courtroom. Eris pushed herself away from the table and walked to a deserted corner of the courtroom, looking out at the city streets through the large, grimy window. She closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the precise details of Briggs's actions, recalling his exact words, the subtle facial expressions of the prosecutors, and the dawning terror on his face. More importantly, she thought of Darius, the innocent young man, and the countless other individuals, defendants and citizens alike, who had likely faced similar microaggressions and overt biases in their daily interactions within this seemingly impartial system. This was not just about one detective sergeant. It was about the culture of an entire organization. She opened her eyes, resolve hardening her jaw. She wouldn't just defend her actions. She would turn this crisis into an unprecedented opportunity. Briggs's contempt, his open prejudice, had, ironically, been a gift. It had allowed Aris to publicly reveal a hidden aspect of her power, to hint at an expertise that went far beyond mere academic consultation. It had forced the issue into the light. She pulled out her secure government-grade tablet, a piece of equipment far more advanced than anything a typical citizen would carry, capable of secure communication and forensic data analysis on the fly. Her fingers, still possessing the speed and precision of a seasoned investigator, began to tap furiously across the encrypted screen. She started compiling a detailed dossier, not just on Briggs's contempt, but on the deeper, more insidious web of discriminatory practices and systemic procedural shortcuts that her long-term, discreet observations of the local police department had already begun to uncover. She would present it to ASAC Vance, Chief Sterling, and District Attorney Hayes, not as a defensive explanation, but as a compelling, undeniable reason for her unprecedented actions. She would highlight the specific nuances of employee misconduct, the subtle evasions of ethical protocols, the ingrained culture of bias that an ordinary citizen might miss, but which screamed systemic failure to a mind as acutely perceptive as hers. She would argue that her prior experience, her unique perspective as a black woman in a position of immense power, was not a liability to be excused, but an indispensable asset in this specific case, and indeed for the future of ethical, equitable law enforcement. Her ultimate gamble: she wouldn't just ask for Briggs's termination and a public apology. She would demand more. She would propose an expanded nationwide investigation into law enforcement conduct and citizen discrimination, leveraging her unique methodologies and her considerable federal influence to identify similar patterns across the entire country. She would not allow herself to be silenced or sidelined. She would face the police department's highest authorities head-on, not as an aggrieved citizen seeking redress, but as an uncompromising force for change, ready to expose a deeper truth that threatened the very fabric of American justice. The integrity of the justice system, her own integrity, and the very concept of impartial, equitable law enforcement depended on it. She was, in this moment, isolated, but armed with a formidable intellect, an unshakable moral compass, and a hidden power that few truly understood. The gauntlet had been thrown, and Dr. Aris Thorne, the quiet, underestimated force, was ready to pick it up, not just for herself, but for every individual who had ever felt invisible, disrespected, or judged by those in positions of petty authority. The emergency, high-stakes meeting room at the local FBI field office, usually a bastion of subdued authority and hushed, almost reverent legal discourse, now crackled with an almost palpable tension. The air was thick with the weight of expectation, simmering skepticism, and the faint, lingering scent of stale coffee that did little to cut through the pervasive anxiety. Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASAC, John Vance, the head of the local FBI field office, his face a tight mask of professional concern, sat at the head of the polished conference table. Beside him sat Chief of Police Thomas Sterling, a man in his 60s, his usual calm replaced by visible agitation. Trailing them was District Attorney Evelyn Hayes, a sharp, meticulously dressed woman in her early 40s, her usual composure replaced by a visible tremor of anxiety. Arrayed around the table were other senior police captains, FBI legal advisors, and federal prosecutors, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to barely concealed disapproval, their collective concern etched deeply onto their faces. They represented the bedrock of the local justice system and were ready to dissect and interrogate Dr. Eris Thorne on her unprecedented actions in Courtroom 4A earlier that morning. Eris walked in, her stride composed, her posture unwavering, exuding a quiet confidence that seemed to absorb the room's ambient tension rather than succumb to it. She carried only her slim, secure government-grade tablet, its dark screen a stark contrast to the thick binders and legal pads usually present at such high-stakes corporate interrogations. She chose her seat, directly facing the array of executives, her gaze sweeping over each member, meeting their scrutiny with an unwavering, almost defiant resolve. She wasn't here to apologize for her actions. She was here to justify them, to expose a truth far more profound and dangerous than a single act of contempt, a truth that struck at the very heart of their operations. ASAC. Vance cleared his throat, his voice formal, betraying none of the earlier agitation from their phone call, a carefully cultivated mask of professional decorum. Dr. Thorne, thank you for attending on such short notice. We are here to discuss the deeply concerning events of this morning's proceedings concerning the case of Mr. Darius Jones, specifically your unconventional response to our Detective Sergeant Briggs and the highly unusual public display of your personal identification. The Bureau requires a thorough, unvarnished explanation of your actions and the circumstances that necessitated them. We understand you felt aggrieved, but surely such drastic measures were unwarranted. His tone was polite, yet subtly condescending, clearly implying Eris had overreacted. Eris nodded, her expression resolute, betraying nothing. ASAC Vance, Chief Sterling, District Attorney Hayes, members of the committee, I understand your concerns regarding department decorum, operational procedure, and the public perception of the police department. My actions this morning were indeed unconventional, by design, but they were not impulsive, nor were they born of personal pique or a desire for theatrics. They were a direct, calculated response to a blatant, egregious assault on an innocent citizen's personal dignity, a severe breach of his privacy, and a fundamental disregard for the constitutional obligations that this police department has to its citizens. Her voice was calm, measured, utterly devoid of defensiveness, yet imbued with an undeniable, steely authority. Each word was carefully chosen, each phrase weighted with purpose. When a detective sergeant in a position of public trust openly mocks a citizen, attempts to convict them on fabricated evidence, and openly defies judicial authority, a mere verbal complaint in that moment would have been woefully insufficient to stem the tide of his defiance and the chilling effect it had on the integrity of your operations. My actions were a necessary escalation. District Attorney Evelyn Hayes interjected, her tone sharp, her eyes narrowed with a prosecutor's skepticism. She was less concerned with decorum than with legal liability. But a public dismissal, Dr. Thorne, of a seasoned detective sergeant? That is an extraordinary, unprecedented measure for what appears to be a dispute with an employee. It could be perceived, and indeed is being perceived by our human resources and legal departments, as an unfair leveraging of your substantial federal influence against a lower-level employee. It sets a dangerous precedent. We are already dealing with a deluge of media inquiries and a formal grievance from Mr. Briggs and other officers alleging harassment, emotional distress, and wrongful termination. This is a significant liability. Her words hung in the air, a thinly veiled accusation, asserting the department's power and hinting at potential counteraction. This was the very hang-by-a-single-hair moment Eris had anticipated, the critical juncture where her true power and the fate of her mission for systemic change would be decided. The room leaned in, waiting for her defense, for her to falter, to show a flicker of regret or uncertainty. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the weight of not just her reputation, but the broader implications for the entire law enforcement community, pressing down on her. This was where she turned the tables. Respectfully, ASAC Vance, Chief Sterling, District Attorney Hayes, members of the committee, Eris began, her gaze unwavering, holding Ms. Hayes's. My background, as many of you are aware, extends beyond mere academic consultation. My tenure with the FBI's Special Investigations Unit, particularly within the Public Corruption Division, is not merely an affiliation or a personal dramatic flair. It is a deep, specialized expertise in identifying, infiltrating, and dismantling complex systemic failures and criminal enterprises that often hide behind seemingly mundane operational procedures. When Detective Sergeant Briggs began to engage in abusive, racially charged, and utterly contemptuous behavior in your courtroom, openly mocking an innocent citizen, attempting to convict him on false pretenses, and openly insulting his presence, I observed patterns, not just of individual misconduct, but of systemic obfuscation. Patterns of deep-seated prejudice and alarming procedural laxity that screamed of a broader, more dangerous problem within this police department's operational culture. She activated her tablet, its screen springing to life with a soft hum. With a practiced tap, she projected a complex, color-coded flowchart onto the large wall-mounted screen at the head of the table. It was a dense, intricate diagram, teeming with interconnected arrows, anonymous internal complaint codes, recurring procedural bypasses, encrypted financial anomalies, and even snippets of recorded conversations. Far more detailed and damning than anything presented in the department's internal audits or public reports. While observing this specific trial, as a concerned citizen, my specialized training compelled me to look far beyond the superficial legal proceedings. Eris continued, her voice now morphing into the precise analytical cadence of a seasoned, unyielding investigator, the transformation palpable in the room. I independently cross-referenced publicly available social media reviews, anonymized internal employee surveys I discreetly obtained from whistleblowers, and this department's own publicly filed incident reports with my own proprietary database of recurrent behavioral patterns. What I found were not isolated anomalies, gentlemen and ladies. I found a consistent, disturbing pattern. A pattern of discriminatory officers consistently arresting or targeting citizens based on arbitrary pretexts, often correlating with their appearance, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. A pattern of critical investigative and civil rights protocols being rushed or entirely bypassed during peak operational times to cut corners and maximize arrest quotas. And a pattern of documented instances where citizen complaints, particularly those alleging discrimination or police misconduct, were systematically minimized, miscategorized, or outright dismissed by lower-level management, protecting problematic employees rather than addressing the core issues. She tapped the screen again, highlighting a series of interconnected nodes on the chart. Each node represented a specific date, a specific incident, a specific precinct, and a specific officer or management decision. The cumulative effect was damning, revealing a pervasive, toxic culture. These are not just isolated incidents of poor policing or employee disputes, she explained, pointing to various clustered nodes on the diagram, each one a red flag. This is a systemic, deeply ingrained cultural problem within this police department's operations, where discriminatory practices are either explicitly sanctioned, tacitly ignored, or outright enabled by a lack of proper oversight and accountability from leadership. Detective Sergeant Briggs's contemptuous behavior this morning, his desperate and misguided attempt to deny me access to due process, was not just arrogance. It was a direct, calculated act to prevent us from uncovering this entire, much deeper network of systemic failures and discriminatory practices. As she spoke, Agent Thorne, who had positioned himself discreetly near the door, activated a pre-recorded audio file. The room was suddenly filled with Detective Sergeant Briggs's harsh, grating laughter from the courtroom, his dismissive words, "The kid's guilty. We both know it. He fits the profile. Always does." The recording continued, capturing his escalating insults, a chilling, undeniable soundtrack to Eris's precise exposition. The final damning audio clip was a conversation between Briggs and a supervisor, recorded weeks earlier, discussing how to handle citizens who don't understand their place. A clear, coded reference to people like Darius, and by extension, Eris herself. The committee members, initially skeptical, began to lean forward, their expressions shifting from doubt to intense, almost horrified fascination. Several instinctively pulled out their own pens, making rapid notes, their eyes glued to the complex, damning diagram on the screen, and the horrifying audio playing in the background. Chief Sterling's jaw had dropped slightly, his usual composure dissolving as his eyes darted between the projected evidence, the live recording of his detective's bigotry, and Eris's unflinching face. District Attorney Hayes's usually impenetrable prosecutor's facade had cracked, revealing a flicker of genuine shock and dawning dread. They realized the immense legal exposure their department and office faced, not just from a citizen dispute, but from a potential class-action lawsuit for systemic discrimination that Eris's evidence could fuel. My direct action this morning, ASAC Vance, Chief Sterling, District Attorney Hayes, Eris concluded, her voice gaining a quiet, undeniable power that resonated through the room, silencing even the recording, was not an act of intimidation designed for a lower-level employee. It was an immediate, non-verbal communication, precisely calculated and delivered at a critical juncture, to Mr. Briggs and to any other officer observing, that their contempt, their prejudice, and their systemic violations would not, under any circumstances, be tolerated. It was a precise, strategic decision to signal that they could not and would not escape accountability by belittling the citizen or attempting to obstruct an investigation. It was a clear, unambiguous statement that Dr. Eris Thorne knows exactly what is happening within your organization, and I am prepared to act, not just for myself, but for every single individual who has been dismissed, disrespected, or discriminated against by your department. A profound, stunned silence filled the room. The committee members exchanged glances, a dawning realization spreading across their faces, chilling them to the bone. Eris hadn't just defended her actions, she had turned the tables completely, revealing a layer of systemic corruption and blatant civil rights violations they hadn't even suspected. Her unconventional action was now revealed as a stroke of strategic brilliance, born from an unparalleled expertise and a moral compass that pointed relentlessly towards true justice. She hadn't just reacted, she had preempted, observed, and now delivered an undeniable, devastating indictment. Then, ASAC Vance broke the silence. He slowly rose from his seat, his gaze fixed on Eris, his expression a mixture of awe, profound respect, and dawning dread at the implications. He looked utterly defeated, yet paradoxically, a strange sense of relief seemed to settle on his features, the relief of a festering wound finally exposed. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice husky with emotion, completely devoid of his earlier irritation and defensiveness, "you have not only clarified your actions beyond any reasonable doubt, but you have also, and far more significantly, unveiled a far graver, systemic threat to our operational integrity, our reputation, and indeed, our entire department. Your unique qualifications are clearly not just an asset. They are, quite frankly, an indispensable necessity for this department's survival and, dare I say, its future." He turned to Chief Sterling and District Attorney Hayes and the other committee members, his voice now ringing with decisive, almost desperate authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is unequivocally clear to me that not only was Dr. Thorne's response entirely justified, but her insights and her continued oversight of this matter are absolutely essential. District Attorney Hayes, Chief Sterling, I want a full, unreserved public apology issued to Dr. Thorne and Mr. Jones immediately. Furthermore, we will cooperate fully with any and all investigations she deems necessary. Every single officer from the ground up will undergo mandatory, rigorous anti-discrimination and citizens' rights training, overseen directly by Dr. Thorne's appointed team. We will launch an immediate, comprehensive internal audit into every aspect of our operations, particularly regarding citizen complaints and officer conduct, under her direct supervision. And Detective Sergeant Briggs, along with any other officers found to have engaged in similar behavior, will face not just termination, but criminal charges where applicable. His behavior and the systemic issues it exposed demand the full force of our legal and disciplinary action. A chorus of agreement, laced with murmurs of admiration and immediate calls for action, rippled through the room. The tide had turned completely. Eris hadn't just survived the gauntlet, she had conquered it, transforming a moment of public scrutiny and potential corporate retaliation into a powerful testament to her unparalleled capabilities and a watershed moment for justice within the local law enforcement. Her quiet resolve had pierced through layers of prejudice and complacency, exposing the truth for all to see. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Detective Sergeant Briggs, still reeling from the shocking revelation of Eris's identity, sat in a small, windowless interrogation room, guarded by a grim-faced Agent Thorne. His hastily summoned lawyer, a junior associate from the city's legal department, looked utterly defeated, already having received frantic, high-priority instructions from District Attorney Hayes's office. The initial charges of insubordination and wrongful termination now seemed trivial. News from the executive meeting room, carried by frantic phone calls and hushed whispers among the precinct staff, had begun to filter down. Briggs's face, which had been ashen, now turned a sickly green. He could hear the distinct sound of more federal agents arriving, their authoritative voices and purposeful strides echoing down the corridor. He was no longer just dealing with a disgruntled citizen. His interrogation room door swung open, revealing two figures: a stern-faced, impeccably dressed federal agent from the Department of Justice, carrying a thick legal file, and, to Briggs's utter horror, Dr. Eris Thorne herself, no longer in her casual suit, but now in a sharp, dark federal uniform, her eyes cold and resolute, utterly devoid of mercy. She held a warrant in her hand, not just for his immediate termination, but for a new, expanded list of potential federal charges, including civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and potentially even corporate negligence related to the systematic discriminatory practices that Eris had meticulously documented within the police department. Detective Sergeant Briggs, Eris stated, her voice calm, powerful, and utterly devoid of emotion, her face impassive. Effective immediately, the incident in the courtroom has escalated into a full-scale federal investigation. Your immediate termination from the police department is now a formality. Your contempt on the stand, your blatant discriminatory actions, and your gross professional misconduct merely expedited this process and revealed the deeper systemic issues we were already investigating within your organization. My background, as you now know, has equipped me to recognize precisely the kind of intricate, insidious prejudice and procedural neglect you and others have been orchestrating. Detective Sergeant Briggs's face, which had been ashen, now turned a sickly, mottled gray. He tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing uselessly, but no words came out. The formidable Detective Sergeant, the man who had dared to mock and humiliate an innocent citizen based on his appearance, was utterly, completely broken. The laughter and sneers had ceased, replaced by the chilling silence of inevitable, uncompromising corporate and federal justice. His petty power, his perceived influence, his entire miserable world had just collapsed around him, brought down by the very woman he had so arrogantly scorned. The catharsis was complete. The seismic shockwaves of Dr. Eris Thorne's revelation and subsequent, decisive actions in Courtroom 4A reverberated far beyond the confines of the local judicial district. The incident, witnessed by startled court personnel and quickly spreading via hushed, frantic phone calls among law enforcement circles, transformed from a mere local disturbance into a potent, system-shaking exposé. The image of Eris, calm and resolute, wielding her federal credential against the backdrop of Detective Sergeant Briggs's crumbling arrogance, became a powerful, albeit privately circulated symbol. For Detective Sergeant Gordon Briggs himself, the descent from his petty, self-appointed throne was as swift as it was absolute. Escorted from the precinct in handcuffs by federal agents, his once immaculate uniform now seemed to sag, a cruel mockery of his former, albeit limited, authority. The immediate termination from the police department was merely the first domino to fall. His public humiliation was quickly followed by formal federal indictments for obstruction of justice, gross professional misconduct, and, most damningly, civil rights violations stemming from documented patterns of discriminatory behavior. He faced a lengthy prison sentence, his bitter pleas for leniency falling on deaf ears. His downfall became a stark, chilling deterrent, a vivid reminder that no amount of prejudice or perceived status could outrun the long arm of federal law, especially when confronted by someone as unyielding and prepared as Dr. Eris Thorne. The ripple effect extended throughout the local police department, forcing a painful but necessary reckoning. The viral whispers, coupled with Eris's meticulously compiled dossier, a comprehensive indictment not just of Briggs, but of a deeply ingrained corporate culture of negligence and subtle prejudice, ignited an inferno of citizen outrage and immediate regulatory action from the relevant state and federal oversight bodies. The police department, facing massive potential fines, a precipitous drop in public trust, and the very real threat of losing federal funding, underwent a radical, painful overhaul. Executives implicated in turning a blind eye to the problematic culture were fired, systemic biases within their training and hiring programs were rooted out, and a new, comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiative was launched, monitored directly by Aris's now elevated influence within the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice. The department issued a public, unreserved apology to Dr. Aris Thorne and to all citizens who had experienced discrimination. A mea culpa broadcast across local news outlets and discreetly circulated among their community liaisons, aiming to mend a public image that had been shattered by Briggs's egregious actions and the department's own complicity. The ripple effect also reached those touched by the initial confrontation, transforming lives in unexpected ways. Darius D. Jones, the young college student, found his life irrevocably altered. Not only were all false charges against him immediately and permanently expunged, but Dr. Thorne personally ensured he received a full scholarship to any university of his choosing, allowing him to pursue his passion for astrophysics without the burden of legal debt or a tainted record. Darius, profoundly impacted by Aris's intervention, dedicated himself to his studies, eventually earning a doctorate and becoming an advocate for STEM education in underserved communities, embodying the positive change Aris sought to inspire. His story became a powerful example of how one act of injustice, when confronted with courage, could lead to unexpected opportunities. As for Chief Prosecutor Vivian Holloway, who had initially dismissed Aris as a mere theorist, the revelation of Aris's past and the damning evidence against Briggs had been a profound shock. Holloway, a woman of ambition and pragmatism, was forced to confront the systemic flaws she had inadvertently upheld. She issued a public apology to Aris and Darius, acknowledging her own initial skepticism. Under Aris's direct supervision and stern yet fair guidance, Holloway spearheaded the legal efforts to reform the district attorney's office. She became a vocal proponent of prosecutorial ethics and fair trial practices, actively promoting transparency and accountability. Her career, while initially shaken, was ultimately redefined by her commitment to genuine justice, earning her a new, hard-won respect within legal circles. She often collaborated with Aris's growing initiatives, becoming a crucial ally in the ongoing fight for systemic change. Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASAC, John Vance, who had initially tried to contain the scandal to protect the FBI's image, underwent an even more significant shift. Witnessing Aris's unwavering resolve and the undeniable evidence she presented, he was compelled to reevaluate his own ingrained pragmatism and long-held bureaucratic approaches. In a quiet, private meeting after Briggs's arrest, Vance sought out Aris. "Dr. Thorne," he began, his voice strained but sincere, "I owe you a profound apology. My focus was on mitigating damage, on preserving appearances. You, however, saw the deeper cancer, the systemic rot. You acted with courage and foresight that I and many others lacked. Your methods, while unorthodox, were absolutely necessary." Vance, a man who rarely admitted fault, became a staunch advocate for Aris within the FBI. He championed her initiatives, using his influence to clear bureaucratic hurdles and secure resources for her expanding operations. He saw in Aris not just a brilliant former agent, but the future of ethical and effective law enforcement, recognizing that true integrity demanded radical, uncompromising action. Aris herself, however, felt no grand sense of personal triumph. The catharsis was internal, a quiet satisfaction that justice, often slow and circuitous, had been served swiftly and decisively. Her actions had cleared the air, demonstrating that true authority stemmed not from intimidation or prejudice, but from unwavering integrity and a profound commitment to justice. Her initial moniker, the Quiet Innovator, had now broadened. Whispers in the halls of power, from federal agencies in Washington, D.C., to local precincts across the nation, referred to her now as the architect of law enforcement justice, acknowledging her profound impact on systemic change within the intricate, often insular, world of public safety. She still maintained her disciplined routine, rising before dawn for Krav Maga, her mind as sharp and agile as her body. This wasn't merely about personal success. It was about ensuring that the scales of justice were balanced for everyone who dared to dream of safe, equitable, and dignified treatment under the law. Her work became a living testament to her belief that true progress wasn't just about catching individual wrongdoers, but about dismantling the flawed systems that enabled them. The executive committee of the local police department, along with Chief Sterling and District Attorney Hayes, now chastened by their initial skepticism and profoundly impressed by Aris's strategic brilliance, issued an unprecedented internal memo. It not only strongly commended Dr. Aris Thorne's exceptional judgment, unparalleled expertise, and unwavering commitment to ethical conduct and civil liberties, but also acknowledged that her unconventional actions were, in fact, crucial to uncovering a vast, industry-wide problem of systemic prejudice and procedural laxity within their own ranks. More significantly, Chief Sterling, a man of profound integrity who had once harbored his own quiet reservations about Aris's assertive style, sought her out personally. In the quiet solitude of his executive office, overlooking the sprawling city, he offered a profound, heartfelt apology, one he had rarely given in his long, successful career. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice thick with regret, "I owe you a sincere, unreserved apology. My initial concerns about your methods, my preoccupation with maintaining external decorum and protecting the department's immediate interests, blinded me to the deeper justice you were pursuing. You saw what none of us did. Your integrity, your courage, and your extraordinary investigative skills are not just an asset to the Department of Justice. They are, quite frankly, an absolute necessity for this department's future and for the entire law enforcement sector." He paused, his gaze now filled with profound respect, meeting hers. "You are truly a remarkable individual, Dr. Thorne. Your actions saved this department from a far greater crisis. This wasn't just an apology, it was a profound affirmation." Sterling, deeply impressed by her strategic brilliance and unwavering commitment, offered her a new, groundbreaking opportunity. He proposed the establishment of a specialized national task force on public integrity and civil rights, directly under the purview of the FBI and the Department of Justice. One designed to proactively investigate and audit systemic issues of misconduct, discrimination, and procedural negligence across all major local and state law enforcement agencies, using undercover methodologies and cutting-edge data analysis. And he asked Aris to head it, granting her unprecedented autonomy, a significantly expanded budget drawn from federal contributions, and direct access to top-level resources to leverage her unique expertise to its fullest potential. This was more than just a collaboration. It was a recognition of her singular abilities, a chance to fundamentally reshape a critical, often insular aspect of the justice system and extend her reach far beyond the confines of a single police precinct. It was the meaningful opportunity that allowed her to truly flourish, using her past as a foundation for unprecedented innovation within the federal regulatory world and beyond. This new, pivotal role allowed Aris to immerse herself fully in the kind of intricate investigative and systemic reform work she excelled at, bridging the gap between raw data, human behavior, and prosecutorial action. She became a driving force in identifying dormant prejudice networks, rooting out corrupt practices, and implementing robust ethical training programs across the entire law enforcement industry. Her keen eye for detail and her profound understanding of human psychology, honed by years of observation and intervention, proved invaluable. She found herself working in synergy with former federal colleagues, leveraging her network to bring unprecedented scrutiny to an industry that had long operated under its own, often lax rules. One crisp autumn afternoon, months after Detective Sergeant Briggs's final sentencing and the complete overhaul at the local police department, Aris found herself walking through the bustling, newly transparent and welcoming police headquarters, a profound sense of purpose in her stride. She spotted Agent Thorne, her chief of special operations, who was overseeing the meticulous preparation of a highly sensitive undercover operation. Agent Thorne, always efficient, noticed her. "Dr. Thorne," Agent Thorne said, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, as he approached with a tablet displaying a detailed operational plan. "Just got word from the National Task Force. Another successful audit completed in Chicago. They uncovered a major loophole in a regional department's evidence collection process that was enabling discriminatory practices. They're facing massive penalties and a forced restructuring. Eris nodded, a soft, content smile touching her lips, a rare sight for those who didn't know her well. Excellent work, Agent Thorne. These are the victories that truly matter. Every single data point, every careful observation, contributes to making our communities safer and more equitable for everyone. She then looked at Agent Thorne, her eyes warm with genuine appreciation. And to think, it all started with one detective sergeant who thought he could get away with anything. Your discretion and foresight were invaluable. Agent Thorne simply nodded, a look of quiet pride on his face. The law enforcement sector, once a place where subtle biases and entrenched power structures often went unchallenged, had begun to subtly transform under Eris's influence. Her calm, decisive actions had cleared the air, demonstrating that true authority stemmed not from intimidation or prejudice, but from unwavering integrity and a profound commitment to justice. The atmosphere was no longer cold and impersonal, but imbued with a quiet professionalism that valued merit and equity above all else. Eris had not just won a case, she had sparked a quiet revolution within the exclusive world of law enforcement. 7 years later, the very fabric of American law enforcement, particularly within its local and state agencies, seemed to hum with a different, more harmonious energy. The pervasive atmosphere of dismissive prejudice and systemic complacency that had once subtly permeated police precincts and courtrooms had largely dissipated, replaced by a tangible sense of improved professionalism, genuine respect, and equitable treatment. It was a transformation directly attributable to the quiet yet profound influence of Dr. Eris Thorne. The echoes of Detective Sergeant Briggs's sneering contempt and the initial defensive backlash from police chiefs and district attorneys had long faded, replaced by widespread recognition of Eris's unyielding integrity and her strategic foresight. Dr. Eris Thorne, now universally revered not just for her keen regulatory mind, but for her unshakable moral compass, had become one of the most influential and respected figures in the U.S. federal justice system, and indeed, a global thought leader in ethical law enforcement. The specialized National Task Force on Public Integrity and Civil Rights she spearheaded had flourished beyond all expectations, becoming a benchmark for proactive oversight, ethics, and best practices within the often opaque world of public safety. Her unique blend of federal authority and deep investigative acumen, forged during her challenging years with the FBI's Special Investigations Unit, proved to be an unstoppable force against white-collar misconduct, systemic discrimination, and even subtle forms of corporate negligence. Under her relentless guidance, the task force had dismantled several intricate, multi-layered corruption networks, exposed pervasive patterns of bias across multiple major police departments, and, most importantly, implemented industry-wide policy changes that recovered billions in illicit gains, while significantly enhancing citizen safety, privacy, and civil liberties. She no longer needed to publicly display her platinum identification card as a tool for confrontation. Its power was woven into the very fabric of her reputation, her every action, and the transformed institutions she had helped reshape. Her initial moniker, the Quiet Innovator, had been almost entirely forgotten by the broader public, superseded by a more resonant title. Now, whispers in the highest echelons of government, from federal agencies in Washington, D.C., to local precincts across the sprawling nation, referred to her with deep respect as the architect of law enforcement justice, acknowledging her profound and lasting impact on systemic change within the intricate, often insular world of public safety. She still maintained her disciplined routine, rising before dawn for her rigorous Krav Maga sessions, her mind as sharp and agile as her body. This consistent self-mastery was not merely about personal well-being. It was about ensuring she remained at peak performance to champion a cause far greater than herself. Her work was a testament to the belief that true progress wasn't just about catching individual wrongdoers, but about dismantling the flawed systems that enabled them, ensuring justice wasn't just served, but permanently built into the very foundations of the American justice system. Emily Chen, the young defense attorney who had initially represented Darius Jones, inspired directly by Eris's courage and unwavering stand, had ascended rapidly within the prosecution ranks. She was now a prominent federal prosecutor specializing in civil rights and corporate accountability, renowned for her meticulous preparation and unshakable ethical stance. Emily had become a mentor herself, actively seeking out and nurturing young lawyers, particularly women and minorities, instilling in them the same principles of integrity, resilience, and fierce dedication to justice that Eris Thorne had so powerfully embodied. She frequently cited Eris's story, a powerful real-world testament to the transformative power of standing firm in the face of prejudice and institutional inertia. Emily often found herself working alongside Eris's task force, coordinating legal action against departments and individuals exposed by the National Task Force, a formidable duo in the relentless pursuit of justice. As for Detective Sergeant Gordon Briggs, his reign of petty tyranny and prejudice was a distant, bitter memory. He languished in a maximum security federal prison, his once immaculate uniform replaced by standard-issue prison garb, his contemptuous sneer utterly extinguished. His ill-gotten gains and any remaining personal assets were confiscated as part of his restitution for the significant damages incurred by the police department due to his actions and the subsequent forced restructuring. His downfall served as a permanent, chilling deterrent for other law enforcement personnel, a stark public demonstration that no one, regardless of their perceived status or ingrained biases, was above the law when the relentless pursuit of justice, spearheaded by Dr. Eris Thorne, was brought to bear. Eris's profound impact extended far beyond the immediate outcomes of her cases and investigations. Driven by a deep-seated desire to ensure that talent and integrity were never again overlooked or stifled due to prejudice, she personally established the Thorne Foundation for Justice and Opportunity. This national program provided comprehensive scholarships, intensive mentorship, and practical training for aspiring legal professionals and law enforcement specialists from underserved communities, actively encouraging them to pursue challenging careers within the FBI, the Department of Justice, and other federal law enforcement agencies, as well as within local police departments, promoting a new generation of ethical leaders. She frequently delivered keynote addresses at prestigious legal conferences, law enforcement summits, and university commencements, sharing her own story not as a tale of personal triumph, but as a compelling call to action for systemic change and a powerful reminder that every single individual had the power to contribute to a more just world. Her speeches resonated deeply, inspiring millions and fostering a new generation to champion justice with both sharp intellect and unwavering moral courage. On a crisp autumn afternoon, precisely 7 years to the day after the infamous courtroom incident, Eris sat in her meticulously organized, spacious office at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., reviewing a new, groundbreaking policy proposal for mandatory anti-bias training across all federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. A soft knock at the door, and her Chief of Special Operations, Agent Thorne, entered, a stack of freshly organized, color-coded reports in his hand. Agent Thorne, now an even more confident, exceptionally competent, and utterly indispensable part of Eris's inner circle, moved with a quiet efficiency and assuredness that completely belied his once strictly reserved demeanor. He had found his true purpose, thriving under Eris's direct yet empowering mentorship, having grown alongside her as she spearheaded industry-wide change. "Director Thorne," Agent Thorne said, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, as he approached with a tablet displaying a detailed operational plan. "Just got word from the National Task Force. Another successful audit completed in Chicago. They uncovered a major loophole in a regional department's evidence collection process that was enabling discriminatory practices. They're facing massive penalties and a forced restructuring." Eris nodded, a soft, content smile touching her lips, a rare sight for those who didn't know her well. "Excellent work, Agent Thorne. These are the victories that truly matter. Every single data point, every careful observation, contributes to making our communities safer and more equitable for everyone." She then looked at Agent Thorne, her eyes warm with genuine appreciation. And to think, it all started with one detective sergeant who thought he could get away with anything. "Your discretion and foresight were invaluable." Agent Thorne simply nodded, a look of quiet pride on his face. The law enforcement sector, once a place where subtle biases and entrenched power structures often went unchallenged, had begun to subtly transform under Eris's influence. Her calm, decisive actions had cleared the air, demonstrating that true authority stemmed not from intimidation or prejudice, but from unwavering integrity and a profound commitment to justice. The atmosphere was no longer cold and impersonal, but imbued with a quiet professionalism that valued merit and equity above all else. Eris had not just won a case. She had sparked a quiet revolution within the exclusive world of law enforcement. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.